What do China's unprecedented military exercises near Taiwan mean for Taiwan and the world? Well, today I speak with a prominent China watcher, Bonnie Glaser, who is the director of the Asia program at the US's German Marshall Fund. What do you think China is trying to achieve through its military exercises near Taiwan?
Well, I think that China has several objectives. One is to essentially scare the people of Taiwan, to induce a sense of psychological despair, lower the morale of the people, reduce their confidence in their government. I think that they want to practice their military capabilities, rehearsing various elements that they would use if they were to invade Taiwan. We specifically saw a blockade rehearsal, essentially demonstrating that they could block foreign ships from intervening. Thirdly, I think that China is intending to warn the United States and Taiwan to stop before the situation gets more serious.
One thing I think the whole world is concerned about is, do you think that a military attack on Taiwan by China is even more likely now?
I think that Xi Jinping has not made a decision to use force against Taiwan. That doesn't mean he won't do so, but there would have to be very specific circumstances for him to do so, in my view. He would have to have confidence that the PLA could succeed. And I think that he is more likely to use force if he sees the danger of Taiwan really becoming independent with the support of the United States. Xi Jinping has talked about, there's this new plan. It's a comprehensive plan to resolve the Taiwan issue in the new era. This was actually mentioned for the first time last year in the third Chinese Communist Party resolution. And we could see a much more aggressive policy against Taiwan going forward. Certainly more use of economic pressure and legal warfare.
Well, the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Colin Kahl also said this week that the U.S. government doesn't think China will attack Taiwan within 2 years. Why do you think the government is saying that?
Well, I think it's in part an assessment of capabilities, and our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, has made very clear a threat is composed of both capabilities and intent. And some people think China already has the capabilities to seize and control Taiwan, others don't. But there really isn't evidence of intent to invade. If you listen to everything that Xi Jinping has said, if you observe Xi Jinping's priorities, he has talked about how reunification is a requirement for national rejuvenation, and the target date for that goal, of course, is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. So that's in 2049. But he hasn't talked about how Taiwan needs to be reunified before then. So 2027 may be a goal to just acquire more effective military capabilities, but it's not been put forward by Beijing as a goal to reintegrate Taiwan with China.
Taiwan's foreign minister this week said that China's military exercises are also a way to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and they also want to change the status quo in the East and South China Seas. Do you agree with him?
I think that China has already made a lot of progress toward changing the status quo in disputed areas around China. So we can look back to 2012 when the Japanese government purchased 3 of the 5 Senkaku Islands from a private citizen. China strongly objected, started sending in their Coast Guard law enforcement vessels, and ever since then, they've really never stopped. And then in the South China Sea in 2012, there was the stalemate between China and the Philippines, and that was at Scarborough Shoal. China ultimately took control of the shoal, but more importantly, I think, is that after that, they decided that they would build these bigger islands. They started dredging sand, and they militarized those islands in the following years. And that fundamentally changed the status quo in China's favor. In the Taiwan Strait, they've sort of just begun that process because they have been operating in Taiwan's aid is, the Air Defense Identification Zone, really since, the spring of 2019. Chinese like to take a crisis and change it into an opportunity and make it advantageous to them. And that's what they're doing with this crisis that they call a crisis, that was, they believe, triggered by Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And I think that they are going to continue to operate militarily around Taiwan that are different from the past. So they could operate not only aircraft regularly over the center line, which they've said they don't recognize any longer. They could operate Navy ships over that line as well, which they've been doing in the exercises in the last few days. And they could fly aircraft or ships within the 12 nautical miles from Taiwan's territory. So that's the airspace and sea space that belongs to Taiwan. That's something they haven't done yet. So there's more that they could do going forward. They could also declare their own air defense identification zone and say that Taiwan's is completely invalid. So I think they're basically trying to squeeze Taiwan's living space, its airspace, its sea space, its aegis, its median line, and assert greater sovereignty over everything that is connected to Taiwan.
So what do you think Taiwan should do about this?
Well, it poses a huge challenge. Taiwan should not respond in a way that is extremely provocative and aggressive, because Taiwan doesn't want to invite an attack or further escalation. I think the most important thing Taiwan really needs to do is to work harder on putting together a credible plan to defend itself, which not only should include preventing the PLA from landing on one of Taiwan's beaches, but also ensure that there's a reserve force that can actually fight if the PLA enters Taiwan. I think civilians should be trained. I'm really supportive of the idea of establishing a territorial defense force. So it needs to be not only a whole of government and whole of military effort, but just a whole of nation determination to defend freedoms and defend the territory.
And what do you think the US and other countries can do to deter China?
Well, the United States, I think, is already doing a significant amount and is bringing in other countries. And this is, I think, one of the achievements of the Biden administration, that the United States has spent quite a bit of time talking with other countries about why a crisis in the Taiwan Strait would be harmful to their security. And the Europeans have decided, hey, they agree with that, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They just don't want to see another country invade a country and try to take it over by force. So we see European involvement, in addition to, of course, far greater outspokenness by Japan. Even more important is the US-Japan alliance now working together far more closely than ever before on preparing for contingencies that might involve Chinese use of force against Taiwan. And then there are other countries that the US, of course, has talked to: Korea, Australia. Both countries have called for at least the preservation of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait in various documents that they have signed. So every country has a different comfort level, and every country sees their interests a little differently, but more and more countries are stepping up. And of course, the United States has made, and in our Defense Department, has made China the pacing threat. So we are really trying to develop, I think, more capabilities to be able to compete effectively with China, to deter China and defeat China if necessary.
So Bonnie, what do you think about the recent Pelosi visit? It seems to, on the one end, show that the US and Taiwan are determined to have, high-level exchanges, but it has also been a reason for China to elevate its military presence here in Taiwan. What do you think of that visit and what's going on now?
So whenever I think about the United States taking some action in support of Taiwan, whether it's an official visit or it's some action like legislation in the Congress. The most important criteria for me is this really going to help Taiwan's security? Is it going to make Taiwan more able to resist China? Is it going to make Taiwan more prosperous? And so I think that things that don't fall in those categories, we have to be really careful about. Sometimes I think the United States needs to do things for Taiwan that are symbolic because Taiwan needs reassurance. Its people need reassurance. And a lot of times when we do things secretly, people don't know about it. So we may do training between our forces that doesn't get reported, but the people of Taiwan then don't know that the United States cares about its security. So I understand why people say sometimes we have to do things that are symbolic, but I still think we have to ask the question, on balance, is it going to help Taiwan or is it going to harm Taiwan? So my concern about the Pelosi visit is that the immediate impact may be positive. Certainly, Taiwan believes that if a very senior official comes from the United States to show support for Taiwan's democracy, that's really welcome. But I worry about the negative consequences. We see all this military activity around Taiwan. Most countries in the region, I think, are really worried about the degree of military activity and the close proximity within which not only US and Chinese forces, but now Chinese and Taiwanese forces are operating in very close proximity. So, you get a higher risk of accident when that takes place. But I'm even more worried about the longer term. And we talked about this, the changing of the status quo. If we are unable to prevent China from changing the status quo fundamentally in its favor, we're going to have to ask the question, was it worth the price? Is what Taiwan really gained from this visit worth the erosion of its security and its prosperity? And I hope I'm wrong. So I want to say the jury is still out, but I am worried.
Well, thank you very much, Bonnie, for speaking with me today. I've been speaking with Bonnie Glaser. She's the director of the Asia program at the US's German Marshall Fund.